All right, so let's move on to percentages. So for percentages, percent literally means per 100. So with that meaning, you already know that percent is always going to be out of 100. So when you say 30%, 50%, 70, 80%, that's always going to be out of 100. So when I say 80%, it's going to be 80 out of 100. If I say 25%, it's going to be 25 out of 100. So a good thing to remember when you're working with percentages, and you'll be doing this in real life when you go shopping, when you go to the mall or something, or when you go to the grocery store, and they say, oh, there's 25% off of something, or there is 30% off of all t-shirts, and you're trying to figure out what's the percentage that you're going to do. You're going to remember your baseline percentages. It makes it easier for you to figure out the percentages of numbers and how much you need to take off and all of that good stuff. So these are some good baseline percentages to remember. So for 50%, 50% is 50 out of 100. Okay, and remember, percentages are related to fractions and they're related to decimals. So percentages can be turned into decimals and percentages can be turned into fractions. Okay, so 50% is the same as saying 50 over 100, or when simplified, it's 1/2. So 50, you always know 50% is always going to mean half. It's always going to be half of that number. 25% is always 25 over 100, and if simplified, it's going to be 1/4 or a quarter. That's why you always say, do you have a quarter of your time, or a quarter of whatever? It's always 1/4. Okay. Now for 10%, 10% is a baseline percentage you're always going to want to remember, because that's when it comes in when you say you have 70% of a number, or 90%, or 20%, or 30%. You can always just use the 10% as your baseline. So 10% always means 10 out of 100. And by the way, the ink is green on my paper, but your ink will be the regular black color, but I ran out of black ink on my printer, so I had to use green ink. So anyway, 10% equals 10 out of 100, or when simplified, it's going to be 1/10. And then 100%. So this was funny. Yesterday, I was asking some of you, I was like, what is 100% of 55? And then some of you were looking at me like, I'm not sure. And I was like, I think some of you thought that 55, or saying 100% of a number, was a trick question. 100% is 100 out of 100. So that means it's one whole. So that means that's, when I say 100% of a number, it's that number. It's the whole thing of that number. It's all of the number included. So if I say 100% of 55 is 55, because that's the whole number. Okay, so now that we know our baseline percentages here, we can figure out the percentage of a number. So let's say we're trying to figure out 30% of 900. Now, when you're trying to find the percentage of a number, there are, just like in anything in math, there are several ways you can find your answer. There are a couple of ways, actually. The two main ways that you can do it is turn your percentage into a decimal and multiply it. So if you were to turn 30% into a decimal, and I remember I showed you this yesterday, you have a decimal in the back of the number, and then you move it twice to the left. So it's going to be 0.3 times 900. Okay, that's one way to find 30% of 900. Now, for some of you, that's not really the way you want to do it. And also, when you're at the store, that's not what you're going to be doing. You're not going to say, okay, let me turn 30% into 0.3 and then try to figure out that. No, you're going to think 10% of you're going to try to find. So usually where your head would go is okay, well, I know what 10% of 900 is, and if I know 10% of 900, then I just got to multiply that by 3. At least that's where I go. And a lot, I know I talked to a lot of you yesterday, and that's what you usually do. So since we know that the baseline, one of our baselines is 10%, and 10%, we can see that in 30, and we can just multiply whatever we find is 10% of 900 and multiply that by 3. If you don't understand what I'm saying right now, you'll see right now. So 10% of 900. So all we got to do is find 1/10 of 900, which is the same thing as saying 10%. Okay, so which would equal, so we would just do 1/10 times 900, which would equal 900 over 10. Sorry, don't see that. 900 over 10. 900 over 10, if you divide 910 into 900, it's going to equal 90. Okay, so now we know that 10% of 900 equals 90. So knowing that 10% of 900 equals 90, now all we need to do is, well, we can't stop there. We already know 10%, but we need 30%. But 10% can go into 30% 3 times. So all we got to do is just multiply this number 3 times, and we'll have 30% of 900. So 90 times 3 is 270. And if you can't do that in your head, that's okay. Feel free to write it out, okay? So it's 270. So 30% of 90 is 270. Okay? And again, if you don't, I'll explain it one more time. The reason why I just found 10% of 900 is because it's way easier to divide 900 by 10 than to do the whole 0.3 times 900 thing like this, which this works too. If you prefer doing it this way, that is okay. But knowing your baseline percentages and just breaking it apart and using it to find your percentage is a really easy way to understand why it is the way it is, because we know that 10% of 900 is 90, because 900 divided by 10 equals 90. And then we just got to multiply it by 3, because if that's 10%, 10% is going to be 3 times, or 30% is going to be 3 times 10%. So 90 times 3 is 270, and that's how you find that that percentage. Now, this will definitely also be on the SBAC, and I know that some of you will be thrown off by this. 50% of a number is 70. So we're not finding 50% of 70. We're not trying to find half of 70. We're trying to figure out half of a specific number is 70 or equals 70. So to figure that out, there's again 2 ways to do it. So you can do it the algorithm way, which is just going 70 divided by the decimal version of 50%, which is 0.5, because you just move the decimal twice over to the left, and it's 0.5. And it's, if you notice, it's the opposite of what we did here. Okay, because this, we're trying to find the percentage of a number. This, we're trying to figure out what number of that, what percentage of a number is a specific number. So it's 70 it's going to be 70 divided by 0.5. Now, for some of you, you might not want to do that. So if you think about it, this is where, again, where your baseline percentages come in. So 50% of a number is 70. Well, I already know that 50% is half of 100%. Okay, so it's going to be half of one whole, because 50 plus 50 equals 100%, right? So knowing that, if I know that 50% is going to make my one whole, and it's going to be half of 50% is always half of a number, all I need to do is double this number, because 70, because whatever this number is, it's half of this number, whatever this number is. So I just need to double up this number. So the easy way to double it up is just do 70 times 2. 70 times 2, here I'll actually write it out this time. 70 times 2, 0 times 2 is 0, 7 times 2 is 14. And so now we know 50% of 140 is 70, because we know that half of 140 equals out to 70. Okay?